Charlie Sykes is standing by. He's a high-profile conservative commentator, radio host, and the author of this book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, great to have you back with us here on CTV. I know it's busy. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
So what do you make of this mixed messaging from the president on this story?
Well, Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and the fact that he said the right thing, said the right words, does not change what he represents in American politics or the damage he's done to the political culture. I mean, I agree with what John Brennan had to say. Anyone who expects that Donald Trump was going to make a pivot at this moment, I think, is somewhat naive. Look, he did not create this toxic environment, but he has certainly stoked it. He has certainly become the arsonist-in-chief.
And you touch on that a lot in your book. How much responsibility do you think the president actually bears in this?
Well, I think he bears a great deal of responsibility, but I also want to say, look, he did not create this toxic environment. It was a pre-existing condition. And political violence has a long history in this country. I mean, I'm old enough to remember back in the 60s and the 70s when we had riots and political murders that almost felt like they were routine. And one of the things that I think perhaps we've forgotten is that political violence is always just below the surface, which is why it is so important to be civil, to not engage in the kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump traffics in, describing your opponents as enemies, engaging in conspiracy theories, implying that your political opponents hate the country. All of those things, I think, are throwing a match onto the tinder.
Absolutely, and even calling the media enemy of the people, Charlie, as you know,
Right.
that he said on Twitter. So what sort of impact does that all have on American society, do you think, when you see a president saying and doing those things?
Well, I think that's the focus is, we focus a lot on Donald Trump himself and what he says and does. I think the greater damage is what he is doing to the political culture, what his supporters and his followers are doing, how they react, how they are influenced by this, how they model this behavior, how in perhaps they act out in, once you describe your opponent, whether it's George Soros or the Clintons, as people who want to destroy America, who are threats to your liberties, who are, deceitful and hateful people. In a country of more than 300 million people, how many unbalanced individuals does it take for this to become a disaster? I think responsible leaders understand this. They understand the importance of responsible leadership. Donald Trump does not.
We're going to bring up our graphic just showing all of the targets here. And Charlie, you've been covering politics for a long time in the U.S. You know a lot of these people and the role they have played, whether it's Joe Biden or the Obamas, the Clintons, and on it goes. Some high-profile Democratic congresswomen as well from Florida and California. The president targeting the media, and I'm curious why you think he would blame the fake news, so to speak, for this.
Well, Donald Trump always needs to have an enemy. He always needs to have an other. He always needs to have somebody to point the finger at. And this, of course, is red meat for his base. It has been red meat for a very, very long time. And it's also a way that he can continue to do something else, which is very Trumpian, which is to refuse to ever take any responsibility or acknowledge any of his own contribution to this culture. He knows that attacking the media is going to get him the applause. He knows that his supporters on the right are going to back him up if he does it. But unfortunately, what it means is that we're not going to be able to take a breath, step back, and say, hey, look, we are in a dangerous spot in American politics. Can we all lower the temperature just a bit? Donald Trump is not the president who is going to bring us together or be the voice of unity and calm.
All right, we're less than 2 weeks away from the midterms, so let me ask you whether you think this story, Charlie, realistically is going to have any sort of impact at all. Are there going to be any American voters who go into that polling booth, in light of this story and say, you know what, maybe we need to dial back a little bit, maybe this is not the way we want to go? Will this have any impact?
It's really too early to tell. It's too early to tell what makes a difference, what moves the needle. I mean, we have been, 2 years almost into the Trump presidency, and constantly we've had this debate. Well, will this change people's minds? Will this move the polls? And we're often surprised to find out that it does not. What is clear is that Democratic intensity is very high, but Republicans are also very motivated. I don't know how this is going to play out. What I am seeing is that after a moment of shock when people realize the scope and the danger of what we're talking about here, after that pause, we've seen people go back into their corners. We've seen the same sort of intense partisanship and tribalism that we've seen for the last several years in American politics. So I don't know that it's actually going to change that underlying dynamic. I would expect that the rhetoric will get worse in the next 12 days rather than better.
When you talk about tribalism and you look at the targets of these packages as well, are you surprised, Charlie? I mean, obviously, we're always surprised when someone goes this far, but that we would see somebody actually take it upon themselves to put in pipe bombs into packages and send them to these people.
Well, it's shocking, but is it really surprising? Again, and as I said, I can remember where I was when Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, when there were riots. I remember where I was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And, as we stoke these tribal hatreds, should we really be shocked that there are some people who take the rhetoric and the language and the demonization seriously and decide to act out? It's a very dangerous time that we live in.
One last question. I mean, you yourself were a longtime Republican. You're still a conservative. Maybe you don't find yourself at home that much anymore in today's Republican Party or the Trumpian Party that has arguably taken over. When we talk about the anger and stoking the hatred, I mean, let's be honest. Are we talking about the Democrats, Charlie, or are we talking about the Republicans?
Well, look, no one has a bigger bully pulpit or a bigger megaphone than Donald Trump. Nobody has the ability to affect the American political culture as much as the President of the United States. But having said that, look, just a year ago, we had Republican congressmen who were shot down at a baseball diamond, including Steve Scalise. We have death threats against Republican Senator Susan Collins after the Kavanaugh hearing. We have groups like Antifa, which have been engaging in street violence. Within the last month, somebody sent a letter laced with ricin to Donald Trump and Pentagon officials. So I think it would be somewhat naive to say that it is only one side that is verging towards more extreme tactics. And again, that's what makes this particular moment so volatile. When the country becomes this divided, when we do not have any sort of mutual respect or communication, are we immune to history? Are we not going to have the kind of tribal violence that other countries have seen? I think that would be very, very naive.
Charlie Sykes joining us, high-profile conservative commentator, the author of this book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, always good to have you with us here in Canada on CTV. Thank you for this today.
Thank you, Todd.